Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Tania Khazaal's podcast. One of the biggest topics that I think comes up is like why your child treats you like the enemy and what's actually happening. I think this is an important conversation because um, I first want to start by saying that there's nothing specific, like, there's a specific kind of grief that nobody has a name for, and I see it every single day, and it's for the grief of losing someone who is still alive and who has decided that you are the enemy in their story. If you're a parent going through this estrangement right now or similar situation, and if your child has pulled away, cut you off, or treats you like somebody that they need to be protected from, I want you to know that what you're feeling is so incredibly real and painful. The confusion is real, the shame is real, but I also want you to know, before we go any further, is that your child did not stop loving you. They have been fed a narrative and a story about you, whether it was self created and validated or someone else planted it into their minds, whatever it is. Today, I want to talk about really where that came from and why your child believes it so completely and what actually has the power to change it. Okay, so when you think about how does a child come to see their parent as the enemy, because it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen because you're a bad parent, which of course there unfortunately are some not so great parents, and I'm not talking about those cases of real abuse or harm, because in those cases, if your safety is a concern, that's a whole other topic. Okay, no questions asked. But I want to be clear about the parents that I'm talking about are the ones that are in my community, the thousands of parents who have gone through my programs, who have taken accountability, who've tried to understand, who've tried to communicate, the ones who reach out to me every single day. They are not the monsters that their children have been told that they are. They are people who loved imperfectly, who thought that they were doing the best, the way that every human does, the way that every human loves. And somehow that imperfect love became evidence of harm. So, how does that happen? Because there's a specific system at work. And once you understand the system, your your child's behavior sorry, starts to make a different kind of sense. And it really starts with language, right? So when you think about over the last decade, maybe 2 decades, a whole new vocabulary has come into our culture, a whole new emotional vocabulary: toxic, unsafe, boundaries, triggering, narcissistic, trauma, gaslighting, trauma response, everything. These words that came from clinical psychology and actual therapy rooms, which were designed to describe very serious diagnosable condition, but somewhere along the way they got pulled out of those rooms in that clinical context and then handed to an entire generation and turned into everyday language in everyday life. And what happens when you give someone a new language? They start to see the world through it before they even have the emotional capacity to even understand it, before they've even emotionally stabilized themselves. They're learning this. So suddenly, a mother who calls too often is no longer a worried mom. She's controlling. Who cries when their child pulls away now is manipulative, is an emotional manipulation, is emotionally mature, which is just normal human imperfect parenthood. Love from a parent is now reframed as harm if the child is not getting it exactly how they want, exactly how they intended, or they're not turning out exactly how they wanted. So it's the parent's fault. And your child didn't come up with this reframing on their own completely. They were taught it. They were taught it by the culture. They were taught it by a therapist who now is online, by a social media algorithm that keeps feeding them content that validates the narrative, that validates the victimhood, right? By friends who had their own unresolved family pain and then found solidarity in shared blame, almost like that trauma bonding, right? By a culture that turned estrangement and cutoff as like a badge of like self-awareness and self-respect and self-empowerment. There's an entire ecosystem that's built around one story. If someone is wrong in your adult child's life, the cause is in their childhood, and the person it lands on is the parent. Now, there is childhood hardships. I'm going to say that. There's childhood hardships. Everybody goes through childhood hardships. And a child starts to form a sense of their identity based on their upbringing. And when you frame a part of your identity around your upbringing, your mother didn't show up the way they wanted, your dad was working too much, they didn't show up as much as you wanted, whatever it is, you start to attach it. Am I good enough? Did they not love me? Did they not see me? All of that. And that pain is real, but it's also a false identity built around a false story most often than not. And once that lens is in place, and then you grow up to learning this language that's validating that, it's like the child is constantly looking for proof. So you reach out and now it's pressure. You give them space and it's abandonment. You apologize, it's manipulation. You set a limit and a standard and now it's controlling, right? You cry and it's guilt tripping, it's gaslighting. There's no version of you that fits inside the story that they're holding because the story isn't actually about what you do, it's about who they've been told you are. So instead of looking inwards and saying, how can I rewrite my story? How can I change the narrative that I built around this story? They're taught to validate and blame, and that allows them to make a justifiable excuse as to why they are the way they are and oftentimes stay stuck. And that's why, most often than not, parents, anything that you've tried hasn't worked because you've been trying to fix a behavior problem, but it's not necessarily a behavior problem, it's a perception problem. And the rules for changing a perception have completely changed. They're different. Parents need to understand what the narrative is and how to approach their children differently instead of feeding into the story. And I think one of the most isolating things about estrangement is that it feels like something that's happening specifically to you, personally to you, and only to you. Like you did something so uniquely wrong that your child had to leave. And I'm going to challenge that. Not to let anyone off the hook because I think accountability is such a big piece, but because the reality and the truth is what is happening in your family is happening in families everywhere. There is a generational and this is really a generational and cultural moment unlike anything we've ever seen before. We are living in a time where an entire generation has been taught that their healing begins with identifying who hurt them, where therapy culture has moved from helping people process pain to helping people assign blame, where cutting someone off now is protecting your peace, where estrangement is a spiritual awakening, remove everything that's negative around you. And I said it before, and I'm going to say it again, therapy has replaced God in so many ways. And I don't mean that as a criticism of mental health. I mean that people used the frameworks for forgiveness, for sitting with difficulty, for accepting life as it is, and people that are imperfect and they make mistakes, those frameworks have been replaced with frameworks that says if it doesn't feel good, it's not good for you. And I've said it before, I think therapy is great with uncovering the wounds, uncovering the moments that have almost shaped the identity that you have against yourself, but that doesn't mean that it's proof. If your parent did anything imperfect, your trauma is now valid, distance is now healing, then what happened to this generation? We have a generation that really started the most, I find, in the millennials. We have a generation that is the most talked about, the most validated, the most emotionally supported generation in history, yet they are the most anxious, the most depressed, the most disconnected generation in history. Doesn't that say something? Doesn't that show something? There's a difference between processing your pain and feeding your pain. There's a difference between understanding your wounds and your childhood wounds and the hardships and the pains that you've gone through, and then building your identity around them. There's a difference between protecting yourself from genuine harm and cutting off the people who love you most because social media told you that discomfort means danger. Your child is not a bad person. They are a person who has been handed a framework that makes you the villain. And they are living inside that framework, completely convinced that they are healing. And this is really important because when you understand that your child is caught up in something bigger than your family, it changes how you respond to it. when you have a culture who is feeding off of the victimhood, people are monetizing this victimhood. And when I say monetizing, I don't mean there are some genuine great people, even like myself, of course, where we're helping people. And the reality is, at the end of the day, it's a business and we have to help people, and you have to be able to charge in order to keep showing up and helping people. But there's a difference between someone who has found the wound and wants them to stay stuck in that wound because of the monetization. I can tell you right now, if tomorrow estrangement was fixed, I'd be a happy camper and I'd move on to the next thing that God wants me to do. But when you have an entire industry like therapy and psychologists, and that's not to say every single one of them, but that have been taught to say, it's essentially keeping them stuck. I have seen people in therapy for 3, 5, 7 years. If you are actually taught a proper framework, there is no reason why you have to be in therapy for that long. They want you there. They want you stuck. They want you to keep coming back because this feeds the industry and this feeds the brokenness that we're seeing in society now. There is no reason why someone has to be in therapy for so long, because that tells you that, wait, maybe the healing that's happening in here is keeping me stuck. Or maybe some parts are healing, but how am I really overcoming it? How is it that I have a framework in place that have had people overcome childhood hardships, what we call trauma now, childhood hardships in a matter of weeks, in a matter of a few exercises and rewriting it? Why? Because when a culture is framing the parents and people as villains of their story, no one is teaching the compassionate route of saying, wait, I need to rewrite this story. I've built an entire story that's been validated by this culture, but I need to rewrite it. What's true? What's really real? Because there's nothing worse than when you feel pain. And in that moment of pain, you go online and it gets validated. Algorithm is scary now, right? How often does it happen where you think about buying something and all of a sudden now you log into social media and you see the advertisements for it? That's how it works. So the moment a child is feeling something and then, they might communicate it. Maybe they type it, they communicate it, whatever it is. Now their algorithm is feeding that 10 reasons your mom is toxic, 5 ways that your father is narcissistic, 10 signs that you have an abusive father. That might not actually even be real abuse. So this is what's happening. And when you understand that, we have to, as parents and children, pull ourselves out and say, no, I'm not the victim here. I had hardships that happened to me. I need to pull myself out and stop making excuses as if everybody is doing me wrong, but I have zero influence on the situation. Because the reality is we do. Parents, you have control of the situation to an extent. It's not, oh, they've just been influenced. It's social media. It's their partner. It's this, that. Look at me. I'm the victim, because that's not healthy either. And the child, oh, it's my parents. Oh, it's this, it's that. Look at me. I'm stuck. It's their fault. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. I wouldn't be stuck here. My life is this way because of them. Both are not healthy. We have to be able to look in the mirror and say, okay, wait, what's happening here? There's a bigger force that's creating a disconnect right now in the families. And when you're aware of what that force is, it's no longer part of your subconscious, it's now part of your conscious mind. And when something becomes a part of your conscious mind, you're able to approach it differently because it's awareness. I'm aware of what's happening, which means I'm going to approach it differently. And that's it, because once you know that, it changes how you respond to it. Parents, when you know that, you're on top now. You're aware of the conditioning that's happening to your child. So the way you approach it, the things that you say start to break that narrative because it doesn't match the narrative. Naturally, over time, stories change. So if you're showing up differently, the narrative that's implanted in that child's mind right now starts to break because the story doesn't match the person that they're seeing. And that's exactly why I teach it. That's why I talk about it in my cutoff culture program, like the new rules of family repair. It's such an incredibly powerful piece because it's like, okay, once I really understand it, this is how I approach it. So I want you to know that this generation is being conditioned to destroy and distance from family and go to their found family. Because when you have found family, your roots are not stable. When your roots are not stable, you're easily persuaded. You're easily more manipulated and controlled and dependent on a system that wants you stuck, not wants you thriving. And I'm here to really create a dent in that system in order for people, parents, and children to really understand there's a way that you can thrive, even given all of this manipulation and control and cut off and everything that's being fed into the society. Okay, so if you want to hear more about this, please subscribe to the podcast, subscribe to the YouTube. I'm trying to drop these at least a couple of times a month in order to help creating the shifts. And I want to say God bless and thank you so much for listening.